Hello and welcome to our live broadcast this evening with a very, very special guest, Kevin Billett, all the way from Bali, I believe, tonight. Tonight is actually a really, it feels to me like a very important topic. It's a subject that is slowly starting to have the taboos unraveling and the stigma being met and softening, as I said in the piece that we were, the introduction piece. And it's such an important topic, and we are so grateful to have you talking about it. Kevin Billett has written a book. He's also somebody who's had personal experience of depression. His book is coming out and launched next month. And it's called Light in the Heart of Darkness. And it's just something that's very important. He has some very interesting and different perspectives about what depression is and what it is not, and the myths that maybe surround it. And he's going to shed a lot of light on this, I hope, tonight. So thank you,
I hope so too. It's a great pleasure to join you, TK. Thank you very, very much. And yes, indeed, I'm coming from Bali at the moment. I've stopped off with Brandon Bays, my wife here. It was her 65th birthday earlier on this week, so we've celebrated her birthday and have taken a little break before one of our courses. So we're enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the sea here in Bali. It's great to join you.
Yeah, beautiful to have you, and thank you for giving us your time.
A pleasure.
So, I mean, where to start, Kevin? Maybe just start telling us a little bit about what your view really is about what is depression.
Well, look, first of all, TK, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because there have been so many taboos around the subject that, in many countries, Western countries, where depression is extremely prevalent. There is still restrictions against the way it can be even talked about. So to have a constructive conversation here is a step in the right direction. One of my biggest prayers is that the subject really gets out on the table and is talked about in healthy ways. When you ask what it is, it's an interesting thing. I'm a little bit of a contrarian. I like to look at what it's not first, because there is so much misleading information out there about depression. I have such mixed feelings. Over the last couple of years or so, I've seen so many newspaper articles, television articles, in the media generally saying we need to look more and talk more about this mental illness called depression. And that's the first thing that I'd like to address here. To call depression a mental illness is absolutely not accurate at the core. Depression is not a mental illness. And until we realize that, the treatments that we're suggesting for depression are treating a symptom rather than treating depression itself. This is really important. Depression can, of course, cause mental disruption. It can cause mental illness. But mental illness then is a symptom of depression. So it's not the root of what depression is. It's not true to say this is a mental illness. It causes mental illness. And I think it's vital for people to kind of open with that and to digest that information. There is no evidence whatsoever that what depression is a mental dysfunction. There is a fallacy that has been propagated by pharma drugs companies for a long time, saying that there is a disruption in the serotonin in the brain. This is not what depression is. There is massive recent research that is even undermining the connection, any connection between serotonin and depression. So wow. First thing, it's not a mental illness. It can cause mental illness. It can cause massive mental disruption. There is no doubt about it. But if we're treating it as a mental illness, we're treating the symptom, not treating the cause of the condition. In a similar vein, it's not a physical disease. It's not a physical illness. Now, if you suffer from depression, you might say, hey, I feel bad. I get, my body's compromised. My energy is low. I'm achy. I'm in pain. Like this. And I go, yes, the same thing applies here. Depression as a condition can cause massive disruptions to the immune system, to the digestive system, to the endocrine system. It can cause a lot of physical problems. But again, the physical problem is therefore a symptom of depression. So, second fallacy, this is at its core not a physical illness. It is not a disease like this. Mm-hmm. Then a big fallacy that, one of the fallacies that I was told when I was diagnosed early on was, well, this is, it's a genetic inevitability. You know, in our family, my mother suffered from depression, and I believe one of my grandmothers as well. And it was like, hey, you know, what do you expect? Your mother suffered from depression, your grandmother suffered. Well, of course you're going to suffer from depression. It's in your genes. And this is complete bullshit. It's absolute bullshit, because there are so many factors that feed into depression. I would say, going back to the turn of the millennium, there was a huge amount of money spent on mapping the human genome, and there were huge expectations that this would be able to predict what we were likely to suffer from illness-wise. You know, even the insurance actuaries at the time were rubbing their hands together, figuring out they were all going to figure out when we dropped dead, and you know, they could make fortunes from insuring that in the right way. And none of that proved to be true. Our genes are a blueprint. They are not an inevitable expression of anything in our lives. So genes as a blueprint, for sure. Do we get tendencies handed down from parents? Absolutely, that can happen, apparently, with what is called epigenetic tagging. This can pass on from both parents, from fathers and from mothers. So there is like a tendency emotionally, a tendency in terms of some behaviors and patterns that are passed on to our offspring. Whether or not that expresses as depression depends on your individual makeup. It depends on your experience in life. It depends on how you become conditioned in life. It depends on what your tendencies are in terms of avoiding emotions as well. So there are a lot of variables at play here. It is not an inevitable fact that if your parents suffered or one parent suffered from depression, that you will also. It can be one way or another. Depression, no depression. You can be free from depression your whole life and not even be concerned about it. You can have dormant or underlying depression and not be aware of it. And your genes, either way, are not the determining factor here. They're a small factor that are affected massively by your conditioning and your personal propensities in life. So then we go, okay, if it's not these types of things, what is it? And actually, depression is an emotional issue. At its core, it is an emotional issue. It's a trap that we fall into normally pretty early on in life. It's a trap of emotional closure, specifically of emotional suppression. Now, this might sound like fancy language, but it's simple at its core. We all have got different techniques for managing our emotions. We're scared of certain emotions, and it varies from person to person. And there are three main techniques which we use. They're called the ego traps. They're three different styles of managing our emotions. So we want to feel the good stuff. We don't want to feel the bad stuff. And we use basically one of three different techniques. The first technique that we use, which is something you might recognize as being an ego pattern, is called inflation. We inflate by pretending, by bigging ourselves up, by placing life's issues outside of ourselves, blaming other people and saying, no, this is not my fault. This is not my problem. This is your fault. This is your problem. Certain politicians come to mind when I talk about inflation. Essentially, it's about pretending to be fireproof, pretending to be more than you are, pretending you've got your shit together when maybe you don't feel you've got it all together. It comes with insensitivity often, boasting, bragging, lifting other people up as if you don't have a care in the world and it's all about them. Bullying people, bulldozing people, exaggeration, these types of tendencies. Now, this type of tendency does not naturally lead to depression, Because what have we done? We've said, okay, life's issues are here, but there's someone else's problem, someone else's fault, someone else's business to do something about. So we've placed them external to ourselves, and we're not dwelling on them so much. We're not worrying about them internally. We are, just pretending that, like I said before, like we're fireproof to life's issues. Now, this causes a lot of pain for ourselves and for other people in life, but it doesn't directly lead to depression. So if this is your main tendency in life, you are less prone to depression, because your core pattern of emotional avoidance here does not feed directly into depression. So that's the first one. Inflation, if that's your tendency, and it is for about a third of the people, then depression is possible for you, but less likely, because your main pattern doesn't fit into it. There's a second pattern, which is called rigidity. Now, this is where the emotional brown stuff hits the fan, and our tendency is to get stiff with it. So to get anxious and to get tense, to be rule-bound or formulaic, to be inflexible, unbending. So it's like, things have got to be done the right way in order for us to be safe, in order for us to be emotionally comfortable in life. Now, this is like a halfway house. This doesn't directly cause depression, but it can feed into depression. So rigidity, the second one, if your tendency is to be very uptight and rule-bound, it can lead you into depression, but something else has to happen first. And that's the third type of emotional avoidance. The third type is the opposite of inflation, and it's called deflation. Now, deflation means when the emotional stress chart goes up. So when the brown stuff hits the fan and keeps hitting the fan, our tendency is to hunker down. Our tendency is to deflate. So if you think of inflation as the balloon of yourself pumped up until it's overextended, until it's really kind of big and expanded. Deflation is like someone comes and lets the air out of your balloon. And with this comes the sense that we're out of control, that we have no positive impact on our environment, on our surroundings, and often on ourselves. So there is a collapse internally. There's a tendency to hide from issues. There is a tendency to pull back from the strong stimuli in life. And there is a tendency here towards victimhood, towards believing that we are victims of circumstance or victims of life. And about roughly a third of us are prone to this. It's our default reaction or default protection mechanism in life. This leads directly to depression. If life then throws stress at us and more stress and drama and trauma, then our likelihood is that we are hunkering down more and more in life. We become shelled, barricaded emotionally. It's like we've got the blanket of depression that we're hiding under in life. And so it needs the technique, the emotional management strategy of deflation to cause depression. If we suffer from depression, we can also say, okay, there must be some form of emotional suppression taking place, some collapse here. Collapse in terms of a strategy to manage our feelings day to day. Fed into that often is the rigidity of anxiety, uptightness, and this can create the type of depression called anxiety depression. So it doesn't need to be involved, and it certainly can for a lot of us. I've experienced depression both ways. It's just a collapse where I felt like there were no more options left and I just wanted to hide. I've felt it like I couldn't get out of bed for days and up to like a week or 10 days at a time. I've felt it like someone has come and robbed me of any option for positivity in life. And I've also experienced it where there was tension and anxiety in the mix, which was more a frenetic version of depression, more fear-based, more, how can you say this? Well, more anxiety in the mix, so more fearful activity taking place in life. Both of these types are well known in the analysis of depression. My point is this: depression is a pattern of emotional closure that includes deflation. It includes collapse. Anything else comes out of that. So without this type of collapse, depression doesn't get experienced. Without the shrinking of deflation, depression is not what someone would experience. So really important to remember this. Not a mental illness, not a physical disease or illness, not a genetic inevitability, but actually an unconscious thing that we do to ourselves in order to try and take away pain and sometimes to increase pleasure in life. The trap that we've fallen into is using this technique of deflation to mute our emotions, to turn them down in life. And it can lead to enormous problems, because if you keep doing that in life, it can end up feeling like, well, you're in the black hole of depression. I can't say it any other way. If you keep collapsing and collapsing, and there's your technique to keep the bad stuff at bay, to keep the pressure of life out, to keep the pain of life in manageable proportions, it's a self-propelling mechanism, and it drives us deeper into the condition we're trying to avoid, and it can be extremely painful. So ultimately what I'm saying then is that a technique that is meant to make us feel better, so to make us feel shielded, to make us feel protected, is actually doing the damage. That is undermining our ability to cope in life. That makes sense to you?
Yeah, no, that is amazing. That does make sense to me. But what you're, just to clarify, is these are techniques or strategies or patterns that are set up unconsciously. We're not necessarily conscious of them. And
very few people are aware of it.
Yeah. So what kind of sets that up? You know, that we go to each of these.
That's a complicated area, TK, and the best way to say it is that according to our conditioning, normally fairly early in childhood, and I'm talking at ages 3 to 8 or 10, let's say, these habits form. They form according to our environment, according to our circumstances, and according to our personality traits. And they become unconscious. They become automatic or default reactions to life, and hence the problem. Now, people don't normally discuss this stuff because it's not that commonly known. But there are 3 distinct ways, and only 3 distinct ways, if you really look at the overview of them. 3 ways in which we try to keep ourselves safe, manage our emotions, and protect ourselves from what we don't want to feel, protect ourselves from what we fear to feel. And there is a trap, particularly with the version of deflation, and definitely when it's mixed with some rigidity, it forms a different form of depression. So we absolutely have got to recognize that what we're looking at here is an emotional issue, an issue of closure. Because why? Because we're not emotionally intelligent beings. We can be intellectually extremely bright, but it seems that our emotional intelligence lags a little bit behind our intellectual intelligence. We don't know what to do with painful emotions. And that's one of the incredible things that I learned from my wife now. She wasn't when I met her. 24 years ago, I'd been suffering from depression cyclically since the age of 8 in life. I can definitely recognize it going back to just after I turned 8 years of age. I was first diagnosed clinically in my mid-teens, and then suffered from just cyclical ups and downs. I could go anything from a month to, in some cases, a few years without experiencing the syndrome, but then absolutely fell back into it. And at the worst of it was just in a hopeless place and pre-suicidal. Then, in 1994, I met Brandon and did some of the journey work, which was brand new in those days. And it was just a massive awakening to the emotional intelligence that is inside the body. It allowed me to open, to stop playing the game that I'd been playing of hiding out, of deflation. It allowed me to be able to open with emotions, knowing that if you, and this is a critical part here, if you stop telling yourself a story about emotions, that emotions themselves flow. They come and they go in a relatively short period of time. It's only when we add a story, so we add a conjectured meaning to our emotions. We tell ourselves, this isn't safe, this is bad, oh, look at me, I'm suffering, this is impossible, I shouldn't be like this, okay? Then we can turn an emotion into a mood. So if we stay say that again. If we stay story-free and allow emotions, like a young child, just to come and to pass through and to go, no problem at all. And I was relearning these kind of childhood techniques as an adult in my late 30s in those days. If, however, and this was my tendency over the years, we tell ourselves stories about who we are, how we should be, what we're allowed to feel, what we're not allowed to feel, who we're responsible for, how we can't be that responsible because we don't have the strength to take that responsibility, and I'm naming some of my stories here, it tends to feed into like a morass that creates a mood, and if we keep telling the same stories, into a state, in my case, of depression, because my technique of management was to collapse with it, to withdraw, to indraw, and to let it fester, I suppose. And then in that, of course, yes, the mental machinations go. We try to talk our way out of it, and we're not really aware that talking ourselves out of depression is not the way to go. Paradoxically, clean and clear feeling of what is here is, I want to say, is a door to freedom. And that was what I learned back in 1994. I underwent then my first journey process work, and absolutely was freed from the old pattern. I came out of that first session knowing that depression was not a part of me, was not available to me anymore. And the medication that I'd been on fell away, and it's 24 years now, and I've not had, we need to find some wood to touch here. Yes, I'm finding some. Not had a single moment of depression in that time. Now, do I feel strong emotions? Yes, I feel strong emotions. They come and they pass through and they go. Even the deep emotions that I previously would have wrestled with are allowed to come and go in my life. Even those that I feared are now allowed to come and go. To give you an example there, some of my old fears were around feeling of rage. I had a real deep-seated fear of my own rage and other people's rage. So it wasn't allowed. And so I stuffed it down inside my body and kind of, pretended it wasn't there. And that can last for so long, the pretense can last for so long, but eventually it's going to surface in life. I had distinct fear of being out of control. And so the fear of out of control in any circumstance that would lead me to the feeling of out of control were just squelched in my life. And so that one also, under wraps. I had a fear of fear itself. And so, the pretense, the shoving it down, going, no, not afraid, just getting on with life, just coping. Any excuse other than admit that I was scared with some of life's circumstances. So that got stuffed down inside my body until in the end, it was taking enormous amounts of energy to keep the emotions that I feared under wraps. And that was a massive feed into the pattern of depression. What I learned from Brandon was how to clearly and cleanly feel to completion the emotions that I'd previously avoided. And that was so massively liberating. I was astonished by the results of it. And it's what I've spent the last 24 years doing my best to share with other people. And as you said earlier, I've just finished a book called Light in the Heart of Darkness, The Surprising Truth About Depression and How to Free Yourself Completely from Its Grips. I've seen so many people over that nearly 2.5 decades free themselves absolutely from depression by crystal clear realization of what it is. And it takes a little bit of courage here to say, okay, I'm willing, with the right guidance, with in the right hands, to open emotionally to feel what I've been hiding from. And in my experience over those years, even emotions like overwhelm can be opened with, and they pass if we stop telling ourselves a story about what it might mean. Even emotions like devastation and deep-seated grief can pass relatively quickly if we know how to do this. So we need to dive into some deeper emotional intelligence with our hands held by people who've done this, with people of experience in this area, and then begin to allow our bodies to feel so the energy can flow, so that the huge amounts of energy that we've been using to keep this under wraps can be freed for living life and for healing. So I'm hoping that's making some sense to you.
No, that's beautiful, and I'm thinking about people who may be listening and may tune in later, because we've had a lot of questions and a lot of interest in this topic. One of the things I think that comes up is that I guess we're not really taught from a young age how to feel. I mean,
no,
as a child, we do it, but what happens that we stop doing that? And what you have mentioned a little bit. We something happens and we take on beliefs. Maybe people.
This is the conditioning that's handed down to us, TK. I mean, we're conditioned partly in the womb, but significantly after we're born and when we become sentient beings. When we develop a sense of individual self. I mean, you take yourself back to when you were a young girl. Were you taught, okay, you feel an emotion, great, just feel the emotion, stop the story, just open with it, let it complete itself, and this is healthy? Or like me, were you told, don't go there, don't do that? Because with me, with boys, I think the conditioning is slightly different than with girls. But generally, it's a prescription against strong emotions because those around us fear their own emotions. So they're passing on the same belief systems, the same habits. I mean, as a young child, I can remember various lessons, spoken and unspoken, where I definitely got it. Not allowed to feel or express anger around my parents. That was just a no-no. Anytime my anger came up, it was like, okay, put the lid on that, because otherwise you're going to end up in deep trouble. And as a boy, not allowed to be vulnerable, not allowed to show weakness, not much allowed to cry unless I was seriously physically hurt, and possibly not even then. So, the lid came on to the anger, the shroud went around the vulnerability and the weakness that all of us feel from time to time. You've got to toughen up. As with boys, I mean, I don't know specifically what the conditioning is in Australia. I have some experience of it from the men's workshops that I've done. But I think it's fairly similar to most Western countries. Like, you've got to be a man from a young age. You've got to man up. And that means you don't show your emotions. You don't feel your emotions. You certainly don't end up with the prissy ones like weakness and vulnerability and hurt and the things that all children naturally feel. And so we learn techniques to brace against them. We learn techniques just to shut them down. And it sets us up for a pattern of potential depression in life when we do this. It also takes in the mix, in my experience, TK, some trauma in life that festers and is unaddressed as we get older. When I looked back in the writing of the book to where depression started for me, I realized it had gone back to age 8. And at age 8, prior to this incident that I'll tell you about, I've seen videos of me. I was a happy kid. I was a little bit cheeky, but definitely had a spring in my step. I was quite a playful and sprightly sort of child. At age 8, I had an accident when I was entrusted with my young sister. I had an accident with her when she was in a pram, and I thought that I'd killed her. And although she was uninjured, what got lodged in my body, what absolutely kind of got stuck with me, was I've killed my sister. And in that moment, because we'd been playing, and she'd ended up kind of going out of control in this pram down a steep hill. The pram hit a tree and turned upside down. And in the moment, I genuinely thought I'd killed her. Now, no harm done, because she was absolutely fine. But in my body, the fear that I'd killed her, in circumstances of play, of being lighthearted, of being a little bit frivolous, they just stopped. And all of a sudden, I needed to become a mini adult, become responsible, take everyone's safety into account before my own. And when I look back at those times, it was like someone came and threw a switch on, that I became dour, serious, I put on weight. And the tendency for depression was right there from the mixture of trauma like this. And I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, I had no clue how do you handle that. No one saw it. I didn't tell anyone. You know, I took it back home to my mum. She said, you know, how's everything? Fine. And it's like, what do you do when you think you've killed your sister? And that chemistry sticks in your body. So this, combined with my tendency from a young age to put a lid on things, there was my recipe for depression. And throughout life, you know, it kept coming back to haunt me, kept coming back to haunt me. And even though I got robust and was strong and often was sporting, you know, applied myself to different aspects of life to distract myself from the underlying feelings that I was feeling, underneath it all and reoccurring from time to time, just some disempowerment, some absolute pointlessness or hopelessness in the core of my being, hopelessness about who I am, hopelessness about the life that I was living. And until I came to the journey and learned how to unearth these things, how to resolve the traumas, how to develop an emotional intelligence that allows this energy of emotions to flow naturally and healthily, I was stuck on this cyclical wheel of falling back into the pit, kind of clawing my way out, sometimes with medication, mostly not. But then, you know, a period of time again, the same old stuff was there to undermine me and pull me back in. That stopped once I learned the techniques that the journey has to offer. And I'm really hoping that with the new book coming out next month, that people can use it as a work tool. I've laid out a significant amount of the work that the journey does in it, and I've recorded audio techniques to help people to discover how they shut down, to discover what they shut down, to open with it, to change beliefs around emotions, to get the unconscious on side in helping to stay open and to allow emotions to flow, and using journey work to clear out old traumas, all while being wide open in consciousness and discovering some deep truths about who we really are. Because we tell ourselves very limiting stories when we're in patterns of depression. You know, they're not pretty stories we tell ourselves. They're not empowering stories. They're often the opposite. And so it's a huge bonus to discover the beautiful truth of the core of our being, to discover the love, to discover the huge potential that's inside of each of us, potential to heal, potential to grow, potential to reach out and to make a difference to other people in life. All these things make a huge difference with depression.
Kevin, it sounds, I'm so excited for your book, and I know that it's rooted in a lot of journey work. And some people are, you know, they're asking, how do you feel? Is the journey going to teach them how to do that?
Yes, well, the journey does, for sure. I'm hoping that the book is a big first step in that direction. There's a lot you can take out of the book. And for me, I've been involved with journey workshops for all those years, and I think the best way to learn the techniques is to learn directly from people who can help you go through it. And the best way to do that is at a journey intensive weekend. It's a 3-day weekend, and I know Brandon is, I think, coming to Australia directly from here in Bali next month. You've got 2 journey intensives, so that's like the ultimate way to learn these techniques so you can apply them in your life. And definitely the book lays all this out so that you can use my voice to guide you. You can understand the basic principles. You can begin to wake up to what depression really is and what you can do about it. So yes, journey intensive as a first option. Book for sure, because I mean, I've written it and I'm biased. I know this. It really helps. Let me come back to the question, because I'm talking around it a little bit here.
Yeah.
What happened for me was that I discovered an undercurrent of well-being and wholeness in my life. And even though emotions through those 24 years have come and gone. It's been tumultuous from time to time. My life has not been pretty or ideal in most people's understanding of those words. My life has been based on an understanding and a direct experience that who and what I am is already enough, is whole, is able to be the context in which these emotions occur. So I'm not as identified with the tumult of life anymore. I've got this feeling that, I feel blessed as well as the honest truth about it, blessed for discovering what I've discovered. But my life from the outside looks pretty much like any normal person's life. I mean, I get angry, I do get pissed off, I get frightened and scared from time to time. I do. I feel like a full range of emotions, but the difference is a lot of them weren't allowed in my life before, and I pretended they weren't here and used the techniques I've described to foster that pretense. That cost me dearly. And for the last nearly quarter of a century, I stopped doing that and started using these emotionally intelligent techniques of recognizing, okay, stop the story, feel what's really here. When you feel a core emotion, a strong emotion, most of them will pass within 2 or 3 minutes if you really soften your body and allow. Even things like devastation, it can pass in a few minutes. And that is, it's a massive freedom, TK, to live like that. That's the core of my experience. I feel like my emotions don't own me anymore. I feel liberated. And yes, the shit hits the fan and stuff comes up. And it's like, okay, so stuff is here to be felt. I'll feel it. Let's stop any story. Let's open it with emotion. Let it pass. Great, thank you. Now what's here? What's next? And there's more life to be lived. There's more sharing to take place. My experiences of much deeper connections in love than previously, because I was so protected. I was so guarded previously, so artificial in many ways. It affected pretty much every area of my life. So I have deep, loving relationships with Brandon, with my family, with my son, with my dad, who I used to fight with all the time. I just love the guy. He's ornery. He's getting on a bit in age now, and his body is beginning to show signs of old age, let's say. So he gets tetchy. And I don't care. I just love him. Where previously that would have wound me up. I mean, he's allowed to be the way he is. I'm not trying to make him into a different person. I'm not trying to manage his emotional state. It's just, okay, all love is here and this stuff takes place. So for me and for those around me, life is allowed. All of it's allowed. And it's been one hell of a ride since that time, an incredible ride.
And could you have imagined when you were in that darkest, gloomiest, time? Because I know that there are people here that are listening that have family members that are in that, that place right now. Yeah. And there is a hopelessness for family members, I guess, too, who are...
Oh, sure. It's a tough thing. I'm not wanting to make light of any of this, TK. I've been there. I've lived in that deepest, darkest hole of depression, and, I've experienced any of it apart from actual suicide. I mean, I've come close to it, and I know that when you're in that place, it seems like there is no hope. When I was in the worst part of depression, I don't think anything that anyone told me would have actually given me hope. When I came to the journey first, I tried it because a friend had kind of booked a session for me. I didn't believe it was going to make any difference, but it absolutely did. So if you have loved ones, family members who suffer from depression, I mean, they have to be in a place of being willing to try. They don't need to believe anything. They don't need to trust that it's going to be the answer for them. They do need to be willing to try it for themselves, not because someone else is pushing them, because we're talking about a soft emotional opening initially here. And that takes a little bit of courage. It takes someone going, okay, I am willing to try this. Otherwise, I mean, what can you do? You can just love them. You can definitely talk more, for sure, but without pushing, without the expectation that change can be instantaneous for someone locked into depression. I mean, normally, and by orthodox treatments, change is slow. There isn't any orthodox treatment that I'm aware of that actually cures depression, because it's been treated as a medical condition, as a mental or physical illness or disease. And until we wake up to the fact that this is an emotional closure that has taken place unconsciously, and we can kind of softly invite that closure to turn into opening, because then there's hope, then there is a way forward, a distinct way that healing can take place completely. And in that emotional opening, the body knows what to do. Our bodies are incredible healing geniuses. I mean, people were telling me, you've got chemical depression. We take these drugs to rebalance your chemical depression, and the drugs themselves were causing more problems than the depression itself often, But when I stopped the emotional closure, used the journey techniques, came off the medication, my body knew perfectly what to do. It knew how to rebalance the neurotransmitters in my brain, which may have been out of whack at that point, I don't know. But my body knew what to do about that. It knew how to make me healthy and to get things back into balance once I was emotionally healthy and in emotional balance.
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates so profoundly. Kevin, is there anything else that you can think that you can share with anyone listening today?
Just briefly, TK, I just would like people to know that freedom from depression, really total freedom from the root causes of depression, is possible. I'm not saying it is going to happen for everyone, because it takes a willingness, it takes an openness, it takes the willingness to take a step in this direction, and it's an unusual step. And I really want people to know, whatever your circumstance, help is available. Please talk about it. Please talk to your family. Please talk to your medical practitioner. And if you feel so called, please, I'm going to follow TK's invitation here. Please come to a Journey Intensive. There are big answers that await you there. So many people have had their lives transformed profoundly from the inside out. This stuff genuinely works. I owe my life to it. And so, yes, freedom is available. And the book that I have, the Light in the Heart of Darkness, is coming out for a soft launch. So it's available as an ebook from the end of next month. And then I'm told that shortly after that, the printed books will come into circulation, but I don't know exactly when. So there may be advice and some clarity and some techniques you can use in that as well. The main message: freedom, complete freedom from depression, is not as unusual today as it used to be. It is available.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Great pleasure to connect with you.
So great to have you. And yes, everyone, I will keep everyone posted on the launch of the book, so that everyone can know when that's available. Kevin will also be around in December to share more. And also, if anyone is feeling called, if they're ready to come and be very supported in a very safe environment, to meet their own depression, or to get resourced if you're supporting somebody who's struggling. I think that's also really important. There is going to be information about those events on this website, one in Gold Coast and one in Sydney in September, and we would love to welcome you to that. Thank you again, Kevin, for being with us.
Such a pleasure, TK. Thank you. I'm really glad to be able to connect with you and with people out there as well. It's a big issue, and all love and blessings and good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and good night, everyone. Thanks, Kevin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.